Welcome. Today we're going to talk about something I really love. I love talking about budgeting and budgets and how they're made and why they work the way that they do. Well, it's kind of a geeky thing to talk about, but we do so much in terms of government spending, and some of that's really productive, some of it's not very productive. But we also have games that we play, and in order to get things done. So I'm excited to talk today about budgeting. There's some fundamental questions about what government should do. And the budget is emblematic of these bigger questions. So people say, well, government should just do the bare minimum, just really national defense, national court system to settle disputes, to adjudicate property rights, protect individual rights. And that's been sort of the libertarian ideology about, government should do very, very minimum. That doesn't cost very much money. It's not really that hard to do, at least on basic level. Then, at the other end, there's an argument that we should protect the people using whatever resources we have. That should be like regulate dangerous industries, provide education, protect some business and individual interests, provide a safety net for the least advantaged, provide equal playing field, a social safety net for everybody, redistribute wealth to those who need it the most, ensure that society, not just individuals, are protected, use government resources to stimulate the economy. That's the other spectrum. That takes a lot of effort, lots of money. How do we get that money? Where's it going to come from? How's it going to get spent? Those are big questions. There's some people, that's a pretty left idea. And then there's people who say, well, we should do something in the middle. Well, some of those bigger questions about what government should do drive how we spend money. Budgets are essentially how do we get money, how do we spend money, and they define what government programs we can do. They shape government decisions and government programs. So, like I said, this big question about what we should do. There's another question about who should decide. Should we let the government make some of these decisions? Should we let individuals make these decisions? Those all end up in budgets. And then how should we make those decisions? By using a certain process, maybe it's democratic. Should we use a sort of an analysis to see which one is our bang for our buck? Or should we just spend money based on some normative values? Like, for example, we spend a lot of money on Social Security, Medicare. These are programs for older people, and they've more or less retired, and we think that that's an important thing for them. In terms of economic efficiency, their spending is not as efficient as something like spending money on low-income young people, because the older people tend to spend money slowly. They don't need as many things, but if we spent money on young people, they'd turn around and spend that money quickly, and it would help stimulate the economy faster. So what is it we value? What are some groups that we just simply can't disadvantage? Some groups that we really should move on from. There's a relationship between the government and the economy, and we know that the budget shapes the economy and that the economy shapes the budget. And how does that work? Well, as we have government spending, that's to say, we take some money from our taxes and we use them to stimulate an industry. That industry grows and it creates jobs. And as we create jobs, then we have more people paying into taxes, and those taxes come back into the government. At the same time, if we raise or lower the taxes, it has an effect on people spending. If we raise the taxes, the government is extracting more money, but people have less buying power, so they're buying fewer things, and it slows down economic growth. If we lower the taxes, though, then we have a lot more people spending money, but the government's recouping less of it. So it stimulates the economy in a different way. The government has two major policy tools to help the economy. The first is called monetary policy, and monetary policy means the amount of money in the system. That's generally managed by the Federal Reserve Board. And the Federal Reserve was established after the Great Depression in order to sort of make sure that the Federal Reserve really has been an important part of economic policy after the Great Depression. And what it did was it established a system where banks could lend each other money overnight. There were requirements on how much money the banks have to have in their reserves every day. And if there's a lot of money in reserves, then the banks aren't spending that money very effectively. They should go make more loans. But they don't want to go below that reserve of money, because then they get penalized by the Fed. So what the Fed does is it manages overnight lending between banks. So banks are encouraged to lend money out to people who want to, buy cars and homes. And if they don't have enough money to cover that financial reserve, then the federal government, through the Fed, will allow them to borrow money from other banks. And when that rate is low, they lend more often because they can get sort of cheaper money. And when that rate goes higher, it slows down the amount of loans that are issued. And as it slows down the amount of loans that are issued, it will slow the economy a little bit, or at least cost more for people to borrow money. And monetary policy is controlled by the Fed in order to prevent inflation, where the economy goes super, super, super fast and the value of money goes down over time. Monetary policy is like only at the federal level because they control how much money is printed, but also how much money is created through lending. Monetary policy, the Fed, it's an independent agency. Okay, the other major tool that the federal government has, and the state governments actually have too, is called fiscal policy, and fiscal policy deals with taxing and spending, the level of taxing, the level of spending. Now, I talked about this earlier, but if we raise taxes, the economy slows down unless we use those taxes to stimulate the economy on the other end. So we find a nice way to spend that money. That could be through investments or grants in startup companies or energy efficient companies, or for example the defense industry. But taxes go up, people slow down with their purchases because they have less effective money that they can choose for themselves, but the tax comes back to the government. And the tax rate goes down, individuals have more choice in how they can use that money, but the government recoups less of it. So the idea was, when you drop the tax rate, the people buy more, and the more buying and the more doing in the economy will grow the economy, and you'll end up getting more taxes back because even though the rate is lower, the economy is growing faster. Okay, now fiscal policy has an effect on the economy, like we talked about. Raising taxes slows the economy. Lowering taxes speeds up the economy, but at the same time, spending has a similar relationship. So if we spend more in government, it means that we have more people who are employed, more contractors, then that creates job growth. And if we spend more, then the economy grows. If we reduce spending, then some defense contractors, some nonprofit partners don't get their money, so they have to lay off people. And so the economy slows down. So typically, the combined strategies on the left, like the Democrats, are raise the taxes and raise the spending. So in that scenario, what happens is we get more money, but then we turn around and we spend it, and that should stimulate the economy. The Republican side, or the more conservative side, would say lower the taxes and lower the spending. If we lower the taxes, then it speeds up the economy, but we also can speed up the economy by, we compensate for the slowed economy by stimulating. The slow economy happens because we're slowing down our spending. So these are sort of two different approaches. Now, what happens if we lower taxes and increase spending? Well, we run out of money. We run budget deficits. Anyway, so we know that they have this relationship role, and they're reciprocal. So if the economy grows fast, then we get more taxes. If the economy slows down, then we have fewer taxes. And then with those taxes, can we stimulate the economy? Can we slow down the economy? Yes. This idea, compensatory economics, in other words, we could use government spending to stimulate the economy, was preached by FDR in the New Deal. And Keynes is the sort of father of that idea that budgets should steer the economy. And ultimately, when this happens, we're making ideological choices about how the economy works. So I got a little bit in the weeds there, but the point here is that there's this relationship, and when we lift taxes, when we slow spending, all those things have an effect. Now, at the federal level, they can create money, they have monetary policy, and they have fiscal policy. They can raise taxes and they can raise spending, lower spending. At the states, they don't have monetary policy, they just have fiscal policy. So fiscal policy in the state, how much money they can spend, they're also constrained how much money they can bring in. So if they can bring in more money in taxes, then they have more money to spend. But if they can't bring more money in taxes, then they can't spend. So if we have to figure out how much we're going to spend in a certain year, we have to forecast what the economy is going to look like and what we think the money is going to come in. Now, in California in 2007, 2008, when we were creating the 2008, 2009 budgets for those fiscal years, they forecasted a big booming economy, and then we had this massive tank. Well, they had created a budget based on this idea that there was going to be a certain amount of money that came in. So they had to make a mid-year budget cut. And what happened was that, at least at our schools, like Cal State Fullerton, they reduced the number of students who could enroll in classes. They reduced the number of classes that were being offered mid-year. And that shock caused a lot of heartache and problems, but it also, I think in our department alone, we ended up letting go 60 adjunct faculty, or at least 60 sections taught by adjunct faculty. So they didn't have money because we didn't have money. So we have to figure out all these things. What's inflation? What's unemployment going to look like in order, at least at the state level, to craft a good budget? Now, some budgeting terms that are important. A typical calendar year starts January 1st, ends December 31st. But for government organizations, we have, instead of what's called a fiscal year. It could be any given budget year. It most of the time starts something like August 1st and ends July 31st. That's what ours is at Fullerton. But it could start in November 1st and end in October. So any 12-month period is a budget year. Now remember, in public sector, we have to have authority or authorization to spend money. And so every year we have to have a reauthorization to spend money, or else that money stagnates and doesn't do anything. So fiscal years are a budget tool that says we start spending on this day, we end spending on this day. Now, if we have more money left over than we've spent, we have a surplus. And a budget surplus is great, right? Because the agency was doing effective, efficient work without spending all their money. Except it's really bad. A surplus is bad because it's money that could have been spent doing something good. We have a lost opportunity there. So almost every agency, all governments, if they're going to have a surplus, they can do one of two things with it. They can pay down some of their debt that they've borrowed, or they should use that money completely in their agency to do good. And if you have a surplus, then let's say you have $1 million and your agency could have spent $1 million to bless or benefit somebody's life, that's not great. So surpluses are not necessarily good in agencies. Now deficits are we spend more than we take in. Now the national government at the federal level is running a deficit right now of $1 trillion. That $1 trillion is being spent on military spending and old people most generally. In fact, the discretionary part of our budget is about about $1 trillion. And that runs almost all the federal government. The other $3 trillion are payment on the national debt, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, entitlement programs. So anyway, we're spending more than we're bringing in tax revenue. We're bringing in about $3 trillion in taxes. We're spending about $4 trillion. Well, when we spend more than we have, what we're doing is we're stimulating the economy. We're borrowing from the future to pay for economic growth now. If I can take out a loan to provide ads for my business, then what I hope is that those ads generate more business, they bring in more revenue, and we can pay for that debt. It's the same sort of idea in government, except that deficit spending pays for things faster than we're bringing in the money. And over time, what happens is we grow a national debt. Now, just like you and your credit card bills, and me and my car buying or whatever it is, whenever I get into this deficit spending more than I have, I accrue a debt. And that debt, at least at the federal level now, is over $20 trillion. So we have to pay interest on that. We have to pay interest on our national debt. So a portion of our budget goes to paying down the debt, or at least paying the principal payments on the debt. And so when we accumulate deficits over time, they accumulate into national debt. That national debt ends up slowing down our economy because we have to dedicate a portion of our budget to pay off the debts. So those are important definitions for us to sort of think through. There's a special rule in California that talks about public utilities, and public utilities can't spend more than the costs to provide that good or service. So in order to expand a waste treatment plant, you can't save money by jacking up the rates on wastewater disposal costs and save that money and then buy the plant with cash. That's actually against the law in California. So we can't do things that we would normally do like in a household, like save your surplus up and then make a cash payment. Instead, what we have to do is we actually have to end up in debt, in that water system, and then roll that debt payment into all of the utility charges so that it gets paid over time. So government doesn't actually work in the same way as like a typical household because of some of the things we're talking about.